From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Chris. Now, if there is one term the Prime Minister hates more than anything else, it's the one that's catched on more than anything else. And no, it's not each way Albo, although I stand by that as a great description of the greatest Prime Minister of all time. Just ask him. Just ask the press gallery. No, of course, it's Airbus Albo. We, of course, have a Prime Minister who has literally flown more kilometres than it takes to fly from the Earth to the Moon and beyond, but he ain't Buzz Lightyear, going to infinity and beyond. Now, we know he's gone to plenty of places overseas, and all of them absolutely necessary. I mean, way more important than anything that has to happen here. I mean, there's photos to be taken, there's glasses to be clinked, there's beautiful boys to be discussed. Now, interestingly, there was a piece that was written in the past couple of days by a bloke who I think's kind of in the Shorten camp, and oh, how the eternal flame burns for one day Bill Shorten becoming the leader of the Labor Party. Anyway, this bloke, by the name of Cameron Milner, now he decided to write something that has got a few tongues wagging in Canberra tonight. He says of the Prime Minister that he's been distracted and simply not in the country enough for a leader supposedly dealing with cost of living crisis. Tick, tick. If not for the parliamentary sitting dates, Albo would no doubt find somewhere, anywhere else to be, apart from Australia, on his Plus Airbus that he reportedly calls Toto One, named after his COVID-era pet dog. Now, as we know, the Prime Minister would desperately like the voters of Australia, and certainly the media of Australia, to be like Toto. You know, always there when he goes, and never talking back, and always being good for a photo op. Now, again, I have no doubt the bloke loves his dog. Who doesn't love their puppy? But we all know that a little bit like did I tell you that I grew up in a housing commission place, single mum? Toto became sort of part of the arsenal. Now, the reason I mention this at the very start of tonight's show is, firstly, I think you need a laugh. But secondly, this has now been followed up on by the multi-award-winning journalist Samantha Maiden at news.com.au, where she has now gone full Canberra Columbo on does the Prime Minister call the Prime Ministerial jet Toto One? Now, according to Samantha's reporting, Prime Minister Albanese's office has flatly denied that he nicknamed the VIP Airbus that he travels on after his dog Toto, despite confirmation that his female cavoodle sometimes snuck onto the plane. Now, Samantha she's not going to take the denial lying down, and I am simply reporting her reporting. Well, she goes on to say, the only problem is there's a clue on the Prime Minister's own website as to how the rumour started. I quote directly, again, from the Gold Walkley winning Ms Maiden. Consider Exhibit A, the transcript of his interview in May of 2022 with Perth's Oliver Peterson. Now, this is where he had a conversation with the drive host on Radio 6PR, friend of the show, friend of the station, Oliver Peterson. Quote, this is Oliver. Prime Minister, before I let you go, have you given the aeroplane a name yet? Because the previous Prime Minister called it Shark One. Are you thinking about calling this one McGowan One or perhaps Glory, Glory to South Sydney? Prime Minister responds, well, I joked the other day on the plane that we might call it Toto One after my lovely puppy. Well, that's it, done. Story solved. Oh, no. There is even more in this story. Where, again, one of the reasons why the reporter decided to pick up the phone to call the Prime Minister's office for the Prime Minister's office to flatly deny was this exchange in Senate estimates.
Could you provide a list of all flights since the 21st of May 2022 on which animals, and specifically an animal called Toto, has been permitted on board special purpose aircraft?
I am aware that there is a history of VIPs travelling with pets on VIP aircraft, and no, Senator, I can't answer that question. We do not keep comprehensive records of when animals travel on VIP aircraft.
Oh, this story's going to annoy him so much. So let's keep going, because Samantha did at news.com.au, and God love her for doing so. As she pointed out, there are photos of Toto at the lodge in Canberra, And there are photos of Toto, Kirribilli House and other locations in Sydney. And as Samantha Maiden, Gold Walkley award-winning journalist, frequent appearer on Insiders, says, unless his partner Jody or a staffer has been throwing Toto in the back of the ute and gunning it up the federal highway, an aircraft of some description is getting that dog from A to B. So until further notice, Airbus Albo is the overall title. An Airbus Albo, he flies on a brand new airline coming soon to Australia. Or not Australia in this case. Toto One. Now flying anywhere but Australia. Get your tickets if you become the Prime Minister. Anyway, that'll annoy him, so good. Something a little more substantive, though, which of course is the Australian Prime Minister completely falling for the game that China is playing. Now, of course, the reality is that, as was very clear from the past couple of years, China is in a position to make a lot of people in this country richer and potentially to do political favours for the political parties that it likes, or more importantly, no favours to the ones it doesn't, and their ability to shift around elections. Now, of course, we know that everything's awesome now because the Chinese government got what it wanted, which was a change in government from the one that was willing to stand up to China to the one that's now willing to fall over themselves to run up to them at international meetings to have photos because it plays oh so well back at home. And yes, when they remove their tariffs, it does mean that many more exports may well end up going to China, and many people back here get a lot richer as a result. The Australian economy, of course, is vastly benefited from the extreme amount of Chinese students which get sent to our universities, not because they're smart enough to be here, but because, of course, being full fee-paying students, well, they add to the overall profitability of our university sector. Now, of course, the reality is that when China doesn't like you, we know what happens. Well, they make things more expensive, or they don't let you sell those things there. They stop the students being able to fly to Australia, and then the university sector and all the people who went to university, who work in the media, blow up on the behalf of the university sector. Then, of course, they switch off the WeChat account of the Prime Minister who stands up to China. You know this history when it comes to the former Prime Minister and WeChat, where many hundreds of thousands of Australian Chinese with family members back in Beijing, they use this as a way of communicating with people at home. Politicians use it here. Scott Morrison did. But miraculously, his account just broke. It didn't happen to work anymore. And then miraculously, at the last election, more than 1 million votes in Chinese-dominated seats, which had constantly voted Liberal, magically turned around and started voting Labor. Nothing really changed in terms of their lifestyle, just apart from perhaps some of the messages which maybe they were getting or not getting on things like WeChat. Now, here's the thing. We know that everything's hunky-dory now between our Prime Minister and their President. And a lot has been said of recent days about what is and isn't being discussed at these meetings. And I'm willing to bet, a little more certain than I am that he calls the plane Toto One, but I will stand by this one. There was no discussion about Uyghurs, the Muslim minority population of China that are held in detention camps because they continue to believe in a God that isn't the CCP. I would also believe that there was no conversation whatsoever about China using the people in those forced labour camps to make solar panels, some of which end up in Australia because we need 22,000 of them a day. I bet that not a single thing was said about cybercrime because, take your pick, do you reckon it came up in conversation that Australia is pretty certain that China were the ones who stole data from an Australian defence contractor? Australia also concluded that China was behind a hack on Parliament House and political parties. You reckon that came up in chat? Do you think there's any chance that ASIO blueprints to their headquarters, which had been hacked by China, came up in conversation at all? Or what about most recently, the ASIO Director General, who told the Five Eyes Intelligence Summit, which is us and multiple other countries trying to do our bit against China, that there are Chinese spies in Australia, one of which has recently been removed? Do you think any of that got mentioned in the meeting in Bali, where half of the time was taken up by the translators and they spoke for about 15 minutes each? Do you reckon any of that got spoken about when he went to Beijing and, let's be honest, was fourth billing on meetings that also involved the Vice President of South Africa, Serbia, Cuba, and also throw in little old Australia? No, of course not. And we obviously know that there's no way that leader-to-leader conversations took place after the Chinese injured a member of the Australian Navy who were trying to remove a fishing net from the propeller of HMAS Toowoomba. They were not in Chinese waters, they were in Japanese waters, but the Chinese decided to fire some sonar equipment and ended up injuring one of our very own members of the Defence Force. Now, we know this never got mentioned. And as we showed you last night, the Prime Minister says, well, you know, our teams kind of talk to their team.
You're copping a fair bit of flack over it, accusations you didn't raise it with the Chinese leadership in San Francisco. Can you clear that up?
Well, we've raised it very clearly through all of the normal channels. But I can assure you that we raised these issues in the appropriate way.
Yeah, look, we wrote on a message and we sort of sent it kind of in the way of China, and fingers crossed the carrier pigeon ran out of puff halfway across the ocean. This was not mentioned from leader to leader. There's no evidence that that's the case. And after yesterday's efforts at trying to say nothing about saying something about saying nothing, the Prime Minister, of course, appeared nowhere today. Oh, he's given a speech tonight where he's going back to the break glass in case of emergency, blame Dutton, have a crack at Peter Dutton. When we have the highlights, we'll show it to you. Do you reckon this will come up in conversation? Of course not. As for Peter Dutton himself, well, he can see the obvious here, which is you've got a Prime Minister who's sidling up to all the benefits of, frankly, not annoying China and not standing up for Australia, its values, or our Defence Force.
The PM gets tricky with his words. I think the test here is whether he can just be upfront and honest and open. Did he say, you know, these words to President Xi, or if not, if he didn't, then apologise. Just admit you've made a mistake, but be honest.
And you know how often I talk about lefties and the Jedi mind trick, the famous scene when Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope says to the stormtroopers that are looking for R2-D2 and C-3PO, these are not the droids you're looking for. And the weak-minded stormtrooper says, these are not the droids we're looking for. Or the Men in Black film where they flash that little thing and you'll simply forget. Lefties love using this trick, and they do it to no great effect here in Australia. But in China, here's their version of it, where apparently, despite the fact that there is an injured member of the Australian Navy, despite the fact that I will well and truly trust what we are being told about why the divers were underneath HMAS Toowoomba, and that China have done what they have done before, which is to fire lasers into the eyes of pilots or drop junk in the front of planes, do everything you can short of actually shooting a bullet to, frankly, intimidate, because that's what they do. Instead, their version is, nothing happened.
I hope the relevant parties will stop causing trouble at China's doorstep and work with China to jointly maintain the momentum of improvement and development of China-Australia relations.
So you see, as always, and every single day, Australia is at a fork in the road. Let's imagine a beautiful country setting where you can choose one direction or go in the other way. And here's the Prime Minister's choice. You say nothing about the injuring of members of our own Defence Force. The Chinese reward you by saying that you're a beautiful boy and you have photo ops everywhere. No messages are sent to people to vote against you. You get lots of pats on the back from billionaires who make lots of money out of selling stuff into China. Or the other road, which is a little rockier, is that you defend your country and you push back on a bully. You call out China on what really matters. You think the Prime Minister even thought about taking the second road? Of course not. There's only upside on the one where you let China do whatever the hell you want and say, thank you so much. Can we have another photo? Meantime, the bully shuffles forward, shuffles forward, shuffles forward, shuffles forward. Oh, they've built islands that never existed before, and now they claim them to be their own territory. You can't sail anywhere near them, and if you do, we'll start shooting at you. Move forward, move forward. But the photo ops keep coming, the WeChat account stays open, the money keeps flowing, the students fill the universities. Just don't say anything about the not war yet. Now, I sit in this seat with great pride each and every night. The great responsibility is to be able to tell you the truth, to speak freely, and to tell you what I see as a problem, and often to point towards either a solution or certainly something that's going to make the problem less difficult. It's why when it comes to the cost of living stuff, I always talk about the cut in petrol taxes, right? It doesn't solve everything, but it takes just a little bit of pressure off. Sadly, I've got something to tell you now that I don't have a solution to, but we've got to talk about the problem. And I say this as the father of 2 kids in primary school, but I say it as a citizen who wants the next generation to be more robust than my generation, more robust than the generations before. But we all know that it doesn't work like that. We don't get stronger as we move on from the greatest generation of World War II. We get weaker for a whole bunch of different reasons. But yet again, there is more evidence that, just like that fork in the road, we have chosen the wrong way of bringing up our kids. Because the Australian newspaper has been great at keeping an eye on what's happening with our kids. And just like the Who sung about the kids being all right, the reality is the kids are not all right. And yes, I pay particular attention because, as I say, my beautiful little girls are in primary school and one day will go to high school, but I care about everyone who's in this stuff. Now, there was a major survey that has been done of primary school and high school kids, and it says this about primary school kids. 44% cannot calm down quickly when they feel bad. 44% cannot control how nervous that they get. 32% are feeling bad for long periods of time. It's a third of all kids in a primary school. 39% of girls, 29% of boys think they're stupid when someone teases them. That's our littlest kids. Then in secondary school, I have a hard time controlling how worried I get. A majority, 56%. I feel very stressed, 53%. I lose my temper a lot, again, a third, 32%. During the past 6 months, I have felt so helpless, hopeless and down almost every day for 1 week that I've stopped doing my usual activities. It's more girls than boys, but it's 21% overall. However, I like the kind of person I am, about 79% of people. So what is quite odd about this finding is that you have this mixture of tides that are happening inside people where they believe that they're good people, they have some confidence about what's going to happen later in their life, but the here and now is pretty difficult. Now, growing up is always difficult and can be embarrassing, and we all know there's that big chunk of our childhood that we'd like to forget, or that big chunk of our adolescence that we'd love to pretend didn't happen. But, of course, it did. It, in part, makes us who we are. But one of the things I think we can all agree upon is that how we learn to deal with the world as a child obviously helps us inform how we behave as younger adults, and then eventually when we get the opportunity to bring up our own children. The people behind this research have had plenty to say about those findings. Let me read a bit of this to you here, where Michael Bernard, who is currently working in California but used to work here in Australia, says the findings are frankly frightening. The most recent data up to 2023 shows no improvement in the social and emotional well-being of children and adolescents despite considerable efforts of schools and parents. In many cases, they're going backwards. Now, let's be specific to primary school kids. Bernard found a range of areas where well-being of primary school-aged children had significantly worsened since 2018. Children finding it hard to calm down quickly or struggling to describe their emotions have shown a rise. So too, the percentage experiencing hurtful feelings and those having prolonged periods of anger. A major contributor to these challenges is a growing number that are refraining from talking to somebody else when they feel bad. Now, these are the littlest kids amongst us. And yes, my absolute laser focus is because this is my kids' generation. Primary school kids who are not telling anyone what's going on inside them. Now, I know for an absolute fact there's plenty I get wrong as a dad, but something that I'm very pleased I have a conversation with my kids about is about their emotions. Asking sometimes about what the weather's like inside them, about whether it's stormy or sunny or a little bit this or a little bit that, because obviously a kid can only talk about their emotions on a certain level. But I know too that there are plenty of times where they don't tell me. They might say something to mum or they might say nothing to us at all, and that in and of itself is a problem. When it comes to high school kids, again, this bloke, looking back at who may well be the kids that are in your life directly as your children or definitely as your grandchildren, have a listen to this. Many can't find ways to express it, that being tension, nervousness, anxiety. 55% say they don't find someone to talk to when they get stressed out. 31% say they lose their temper a lot. More than 70% say they could be doing better in their schoolwork. Bernard puts this down to a delay in the development of socio-emotional strengths they need to navigate the increasingly demanding curriculum, attributes such as tolerating frustration and time management. He says a telling 2023 data point is the proportion of high school students, more than 1 in 5, who say that at some point in the past 6 months they've felt so hopeless and down every day for a week that they stop doing their usual activities. For girls, it's 1 in 3. I really find this quite disturbing statistics. It points to a really deep-seated issue requiring professional mental health support. Now, I've gone on quite a while and I've shown you lots of data and read you plenty of stuff. And it's not exciting TV to watch somebody reading from the paper on TV. But I wanted to take a couple of seconds here to go, something's wrong. I don't know what the solution is. If automatically you're yelling at your TV and say, well, you know, young kids should be smacked more and national service. OK, that's not going to solve it. Something's going on here. We have to have the best conversations we have with the little kids in our lives and the teenagers as well. We have to find out ways to know what's going on inside their little bodies because they're born into the greatest country in the world that's never been richer, that's never been healthier and that's never been safer. So why do they feel all of these things? Now, again, some people will say it's because they're told about things that young minds can't get their head around, like the history of the country or climate change, and you might be right. They might be spending too much time on devices that means their attention span is not even. A percentage of yours, mine, and certainly even less than our parents and grandparents. But what I really wanted to do was to hopefully connect with someone somewhere in Australia tonight who is feeling the difficulty of being a parent or a grandparent and not being able to communicate with your kids. Or maybe, just maybe, when this conversation speeds around the internet via skynews.com.au or our YouTube channel, that it might get to a kid, might get to a teenager who's kind of into the news but doesn't really talk about this stuff. Well, to both of you, I have the best solution I can offer in a place where I don't have many solutions, which is if you can't talk to the people who are in your family, maybe talk to somebody who's in somebody else's family who's got some expertise in this. The Kids Helpline is an incredible service that we've raised an awful lot of money for, especially during COVID. I was so proud of what you guys did in donating to this cause. If you are under the age of 18 and you've got some issues and you want to talk maybe as a little kid about the weather that's going on inside you, or as a teenager about the other difficulties that are going on, write this number down and find a way to call it. They won't judge you, they just want to talk to you. 1-800-551-800. 1-800-551-800. And also there's a thing called Parent Line. If you're a parent or a grandparent and you're struggling with the big issues like this. Now, sadly, I don't have one telephone number to give you. It is different state by state around the country. But go and have a look for Parent Line as well as the Kids Helpline. All right, let's also talk now about the United States, where yet another poll is telling us there is about to be a change of president, but we are, of course, 1 year away from the general election. Now, overall, it shows that approval for Joe Biden is not looking good. Here it is on NBC just from a couple of days ago.
What is his job approval rating? We measure it now at 40%, with 57% disapproving. The significance, that is the lowest President Biden has ever measured in our poll in terms of job approval. And just look at the sea change from the start of this year.
Now, interestingly, one of the areas where Joe Biden is really failing, apart from everything to do with the economy, is the issues of foreign policy. It's young voters in particular who hate his position when it comes to Israel. But this is a rarity for an American president that, of course, is deeply involved in what's happening in Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, and other places around the world.
On foreign policy, 33% approve of Joe Biden's job performance. Just in September, we asked the same question, and it was 41-53.
These numbers surprised our own pollsters, Steve, with one saying he cannot remember a time when a foreign entanglement that didn't involve U.S. troops had the capacity to transform the electorate. And that's not the case in this poll.
Now, interestingly, obviously, if there's a fight that happens, in a year from now and all the numbers hold, what's the result?
Donald Trump, we have at 46%. Biden, 44%.
But there's one thing that unites almost everyone in America, which is they don't want a rematch of Biden versus Trump. In fact, if it was Biden running not against Trump, and if it was Trump that's not running against Biden, what happens?
So we said, let's measure this one way, and here's how we did it. Biden against an unnamed Republican. This is just a referendum on Biden, basically. And look at this. He goes from being in a dogfight with Trump to being double digits behind, but then flip it around. Trump against an unnamed Democrat. Trump goes from leading against Biden to being down by 6 points against the Democrat.
They both lose. But we win tonight because we get the chance to talk to Megyn Kelly on a night which is no sooks, no lefties. Matt Canavan, James Morrow, Megyn Kelly, all after the break here on Paul Murray Live. Thank you very much for watching. Now, the aforementioned, the lovely James Morrow is here, of course, National Affairs Editor of the Daily Telegraph and one of the big three with Outsiders each and every Sunday. Lovely to see you, sir.
Great to be here, Paul.
And back at home, where he does his best work, because it's as far away from Canberra as a human should be, is none other than the great Senator Matt Canavan, joining us from Rocky Yeppoon, kind of that area. Lovely to see you, mate. How you been?
Been fantastic. Great to be back in Queensland. Haven't been here enough over the last month, so fantastic. Got some rain too. Really good.
Well, you got that in common with the Prime Minister being nowhere near the country that you had responsibility for and that you'd actually love. All right, so let's talk here about the back and forth again when it comes to the Prime Minister and China, because, James, as I pointed out, right, there is a fork in the road that every leader has to choose, right, which is do you stand up for your national interest or do you do the easy stuff, which is going to be the photo ops, the cuddles, the money, the WeChatting, all the rest of it, right? Because all of that comes at a price, and the price is never call us out, even when we do the wrong thing to one of your soldiers, and it'll be easy sailing. And it looks like Albanese has chosen that path.
Absolutely, and you just know that the whole thing, he went into this whole meeting with China, with Xi, and he started his whole government, I'm not Scott Morrison. I am Anthony Albanese. I'm the greatest diplomat since Henry Kissinger or Metternich. I am going to be, the one who repairs the relationship here. Of course, Albo, so of course, that's not actually going to happen there. This whole thing with, of course, the sonar and a really bizarre and disturbing incident, well, we knew something was going to happen because this is what they always do. The pattern of China is they give with one hand and then, you kowtow and you say, oh, look how good it is, we've got this great relation, and then they treat you like crap on the other, and you're there with no self-respect, and they laugh at you. And I'll say this for Scott Morrison, he did stand up for Australia's interests, even though it hurt.
Well, to the extent where financially they went after him, politically, all the rest of it. But can we just keep showing that same footage again? Because I just think it is such a metaphor, right? Which is Xi sitting there not even thinking about Australia. The Australian Prime Minister sort of runs up, like, dare I say, Toto would, run up, hey, g'day mate, can we have a photo? Oh, yes, of course. And while all of this is happening, just a couple of days earlier, this thing had happened when it came to our Navy. Again, Matt, I understand, I get the joy of being able to sit here in the man cave and mouth off. These are the people that actually have to manage the relationships. But the reality is that if you look at the arc of time, where we're going to be in a scenario here, while our politicians focus on the news cycle and the electoral cycle, China's looking at this in decades and decades and decades. And in the same way that we all woke up one day and the South China Sea had a couple of new islands in it, the same's going to happen again and again and again, unless you draw a line, and you don't say we're going to war with China, you just say, hey, hang on, mate, I thought we were sweet.
Well, exactly right, Paul. And just to add, I think one more factor here is what I find the most disgraceful thing about the Prime Minister's actions, or what we can surmise from his actions, given he won't say anything, is his failure to stand up for the Australian men and women who serve in our armed forces.
Correct.
I mean, our Australian diggers here have been injured by the Chinese actions, and we haven't even got a Prime Minister with the guts to, on behalf of them, to raise these issues with a country that's caused these injuries. I think it's a gross dereliction of his fundamental duty as the Commander-in-Chief to lead our armed forces and to always have their back. Now, as I say, I can only conclude that he hasn't raised this with the President of China, because I think we can all attest that if he had have raised it with it, he'd be saying that publicly right now, given the criticism he's copping. And then the other factor here is, I think what you've alluded to, is that I think this is a test that China put out to us. They clearly tested the Prime Minister here following his Gough Whitlam-esque parody a few weeks ago in Beijing. And he's been found wanting. So China now knows that the Prime Minister won't push back against anything they do, and that puts us in a very dangerous position as a country.
Yeah, James, I can't help but think that, while obviously all of the relationships in our lives are perfect, there would be no doubt people who always call about 10 minutes into when you're on the air just to leave a voicemail message, get back to me when you can, because they know you're not going to pick up. And I reckon that's the example here about what's happened, which has gone, hang on, so when's he in the air? Or I'll call them, oh, sorry, mate, I left your voicemail, playing phone tag. Come on, it is damn serious, but there's a lot of play here. And again, Prime Minister nowhere to be seen today, gives a speech tonight all about bashing Dutton. Watch them tomorrow, all the chooks run away and report that and not actually stay on the main game. Now, meantime, apparently the premiers, now again, in the same way I don't believe that any of the fights between the Greens and Labor are real, the fights between Labor state premiers and a Labor federal government, they ain't real. There's a lot of kabuki theatre and noise. But apparently they're trying to say that they want a greater say in the immigration flow, to be able to say, hey, look, we're Queensland, we need X numbers of this type of person, and feeding that into the overall machine that Canberra helps decide the people that come into the country. Now, of course, as we have long discussed, 90% of anyone who's a new arrival to Australia ends up in Sydney or Melbourne. Reality is there'll be issues in Western Australia, regional Queensland, and those people aren't normally front in the queue. If this is real, is this a good idea?
Yeah, look, I think it is a good idea because, the whole problem, Paul, with our immigration system here right now is that the feds get to decide, how big the intake is, and the states have to provide all the services, all the housing, all the infrastructure. You live in Sydney, you know what it's like. People in Melbourne, they know what it's like. This is a really big, and I think it's the big sleeper issue, Paul, going into the election, which could be as soon as, 12 months from now. Let's be realistic about this. The fact is that the immigration system is a mess. We know that this is causing a lot of dislocation. We know that household income has shrunk. We know that the GDP is getting a sugar hit, but actual household incomes are going backwards. Housing prices, I don't care what some of these economists out there on Twitter say, it is being driven up by this mass migration. If we had more skilled migrants and fewer, students who are really glorified Uber drivers coming in here, that would be a big benefit to the economy. But the states need to be able to have a bit of a say because they're the ones who have to cop it.
Well, but also, I'd like to see the government turn around and look into, if not outright say, we're going to pause family reunion for 12 months, right? So,
absolutely.
So the only people coming in are the ones that are absolutely necessary, allegedly, for the economy. But of course, as we know, the whole reason this is done is a pump and dump scheme from Treasury to keep their numbers ticking over. So right now, the Australian budget is in a surplus, but households in Australia are in a recession. The great divide between,
exactly right.
Canberra class and reality. Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, exactly right. We're going backwards on a per person level. The only reason our GDP, our overall economic output's going up is because we're importing a lot more people from overseas. And look, I agree with you, Paul, that these confected fights between the Labor premiers and the Labor federal government remind you a bit of WWE wrestling, right? Like, Hulk Hogan breaking the chair that's already broken over the Prime Minister's back. It doesn't really hurt, but he pretends. And That's right. But unfortunately, we're all the victims of all this because the Federal Labor Party has totally botched our emergence from the COVID pandemic. They spent years nitpicking over every little thing that the former coalition government did during COVID and claiming they would do better. Well, now they've been given the reins and they actually had to govern. they had to work out how to open our borders. They'd been closed for a couple of years. We obviously needed to bring migrants back in, and they've just totally botched it. They've just opened the floodgates without any planning. And while I don't disagree with this sort of idea that's going forward, but it shouldn't be the state government's job here. This should be the federal government's job. They have the job of controlling the borders. How hard is it to make sure that the numbers we're taking in aren't causing massive pain around the country? They just haven't had their hand on the wheels here. They have just let things rip. And we're all paying the price for it.
Yeah, but Matt, I mean, I think they know that they're letting it rip, and they're letting it rip because they need the GDP numbers to stay strong. The only thing that is keeping Australia afloat right now is this migration. And, you know, I know we have in Australia this almost religion of the economy and GDP, but there's also a big social cohesion point on this. If you look at the latest Scanlon report on social cohesion, it's way down. I think part of that's COVID, but, you know, I think also when you have so many people who are trying to bring in and turn into Australians, there's a limit to the number that we can as a society do.
But literally, I mean, as we spoke about last night, right, with the Turbans for Australia people, there are lines for food in Australia.
Correct.
Right? So more in, right? The lines for the rental properties. The fact that right now in Ipswich, if there's a rental property, 120 people will look at it. Now, you know, God love, and I want as many people to be listening to River 949 as possible. Love you, Drew. But the reality is that is an unusual scenario when the rental market is that tight in a place like Ipswich. The Floptus CEO, well, let's now say Optus because she's gone, so I'll maybe take the foot off the pedal ever so slightly. It reminds me a little bit about all these people who lost their mind, in my view, about the Christine Holger. Right? Oh, she was wrongly done. And hang on, you remember the watches? You were paying for it, all right? But these people now saying, oh, she's the victim of sexism or something's wrong in her going. Of course she should go. She was not up to it.
She was not up to the media communication task. Optus has its own problems, clearly, as a company, which she did not manage, A, during that hack, B, during this. I do think, though, that the danger that we fall into is to say, we've got the head on the pike, we've got the scapegoat, we've got the blame, therefore Optus is all right. Clearly, there's a much bigger problem there, and I think the shareholders, Singtel, the Singaporeans, will need to really do a much bigger deep dive because almost it doesn't matter who the person is running it if there's bigger problems how the place is run. And if you just go for the scapegoat, you don't solve the problem.
All right. Now, Matt, I've only got a chance to ask you one big issue that's going to be an area of expertise. You want to talk about guns or water? Your choice. And then I'll open the door to which one I'm going to talk about.
Water for sure. Water for sure. I'm not sure guns are my expertise, to be honest. But
Country Queensland. Come on, I thought it might be a go. All right. So councils are fighting back against water buybacks. They always say that the next World War, well, currently playing out now, but the one after that will be about water. Well, we've got battles happening right now in Australia.
Well, it's just another fight the government's picked here because they're chasing green votes in the city. They've decided to reopen this can of worms called water buybacks. The former government put a cap on this so that we wouldn't reduce our food growing capacity anymore in our nation's food bowl in the Murray-Darling. This government's come to power and said, no, we're going to buy back water again. And these buybacks are really buyouts. They buy out farmers, and the farmers are okay. They get paid, but we grow less food as a nation, and those towns and communities that rely on food production for their broader economic activity are left high and dry. So it's really the poor people in these great Australian towns like Shepparton, like Griffith, like Deniliquin, that get left behind by this. So I want to see our farming, our great farming heritage stay alive in this country. There is no need to buy back water. We can save water in smarter and better ways. Now, this legislation will be coming up to the federal parliament in the next few months, and we're going to fight against this because we want to support our nation's farmers. Look at how high food inflation has been in recent years. We don't want to make it worse by limiting the amount of food we produce in Australia.
No, never forget the priorities, right? The water policy is being set by the member for Sydney, and the Agriculture Minister has an office in central Brisbane. Like, seriously, they are not connected to, they're only connected to one half of the picture or even less than half of the picture, and that's the people who say, the bush, that's just where you put all the wind farms. As for everyone else, well, bugger them. It's not acceptable, not okay. And that's why you're a great advocate in the Senator and future Senator, if you want to run for a home state here or anywhere else. Thank you, lads. Do appreciate it. Megyn Kelly, straight after the break, lots to fire up about, including that amazing new president in Argentina. Our Favourite time of the week, we get to talk to the great Megyn Kelly, host of the Megyn Kelly Show. She's also going to be the host of the next presidential debate amongst the Republicans. But today's a very special day. It's Swampy Joe, Slippery Joe, Stupid Joe's 81st birthday in the United States. What a celebration. Megyn, did you get him something special?
A walker, visit to the living facility I'm looking at for my mom. They could hang out. They could talk. My mom knows about as much about how to operate the nuclear codes as Joe Biden does at this point. I mean, they're trying to keep him out of the public eye because they don't want to celebrate his 81st birthday and call attention to just how old he is. But he sneaked out for the turkey pardoning. You know, we do this thing before Thanksgiving where he pardons the turkeys and lets them live. And he couldn't even get that right. He tried to make some comment about Taylor Swift's tour, but he wound up referencing Beyonce's tour, but he didn't refer to her as Beyonce. He called her Britney, as in Britney Spears, who's not on tour at all.
Now, just to get here, Liberty and Bell had to beat some tough odds in competition. They had to work hard to show patience and be willing to travel over 1,000 miles. You could say even this harder than getting a ticket to the Renaissance tour or Britney's tour. She's down in, it's kind of warm in Brazil right now.
He can't get anything out right. Even at his, all he had to do was say, I pardon you, little turkeys. Couldn't do it.
Now, why are people going after Elon Musk?
Well, Media Matters, this disgusting, vile, hateful group whose mission in life is to ruin the professional careers of conservatives or people who don't subscribe to progressive woke think, is trying to take him down. They're trying to get X closed. They're trying to get Elon labeled an anti-Semite, and they are on a tear. So what they did was they, according to Elon, they went over on X, they created an account, and then they just kept liking anything that was anti-Semitic that they could find. And of course, it being a free speech platform, you're going to find some things. You could find anything on TikTok, biased either way. And so they just kept liking it. And the way the algorithm works is it will feed you content of the type that you have been liking. And so they developed a Twitter feed that was very, very anti-Semitic. And then eventually ads appeared, only a couple from these blue chip brands. But when they got them up, they took screen grabs, and then they would refresh the content and get another screen grab of the next advertiser to make it look like these ads were promoting anti-Semitic content all over Twitter. When in fact, what Elon says is literally only this one account that kept liking intentionally anti-Semitic comment was showing these ads. So it was a targeted takedown by Media Matters of X and Elon. Now, in any sane world, these advertisers would say, Media Matters is the disgusting hack partisan group that does nothing other than try to get conservatives canceled. We're not listening to them. But life being what it is, they didn't do that. And they saw an opportunity to say, okay, I'm out, and look like the virtuous corporate warriors they purport to be. And so companies like Apple and IBM pulled their ads off Twitter, now X. And that's a forum that's already suffering from the pullout of advertisers, thanks to the bad press that Elon has taken. So we need Twitter to survive, X now to survive, because it's one of the only, if not the only forum in America where you really do have free speech, warts and all. And people need to push back on this disgusting group, Media Matters, whose president has got a long history of saying very bigoted things against Jews, against trans people. There's a long list that's been documented. He just dismisses it as, oh, I was younger. Well, that doesn't excuse it. And we need to stand up for Elon Musk and X, because if you think he's the last, you're wrong. Whoever decides to launch and nurture a platform that isn't far left will eventually come under Media Matters attack. And the rest of us need to recognize a targeted hit job versus a genuine, legit controversy.
Now, of course, to further explain to people, you see, these hit jobs are all about trying to sort of unleash a hit squad of people who then go and complain to advertisers, and they've done this to many organisations around the world. But it's the same very small group of people that don't buy any of the products, but they take all of their messages from sort of anti-centre or anti-centre-right media organisations, don't they?
Well, one of the most disgusting things is all the press is, of course, deliriously happy to see Elon get hit and to see X get hit. So you've got articles on this promoting, anti-Semitic behavior by Elon, by Twitter, in the New York Times, on CNN, all the usual suspects. Meanwhile, the New York Times is just fine with hiring a guy who is literally a Hitler lover, who has posts within the past few years saying, "Oh, Hitler, how right you were. I adore you. You were so brilliant." That guy got a job at the New York Times. Media Matters, no hit job. Twitter allows some Media Matters employee to create an anti-Semitic account where he decides he wants to keep liking these tweets over and over. That's got to lead to the collapse of Twitter. The media is so disgusting in its hypocrisy. Anyone paying attention can see it. Unfortunately, most people have lives to live, and they just hear, "Oh, it's anti-Semitic now. I guess I don't support it." In today's day and age, you have to pay attention.
My favourite story of the day is that Argentina has a new president. He looks crazy, but his ideas will be interesting to see if they work.
Okay, so this guy, Javier Milei, is fascinating. Just a quick Google search tells me that he openly says he loves tantric sex, that he is a big promoter of threesomes, that he thinks he can speak to his dead dog via telepathy and is not embarrassed to admit it, that he had his dogs cloned and they're running around, I guess, advising him in the for life as well as the after. He wants to get rid of virtually all of Argentina's government. And the people support this because they have 110% inflation in Argentina. It's a hot mess down there. So they are ready for a revolution. And, we've seen this in place after place, not only the United States with Trump, but the UK had its period with Brexit. They've sort of calmed down and gone more traditionalist as of late. Now Argentina. The people are rising up against these so-called elites. And the more in your face these candidates are, the more beloved they become with the base. This guy, I mean, I'm sure you've seen some of the clips, but he's out there saying, "You can't give, quote, libtards even an inch, not an inch." The rhetoric is colorful. It's entertaining. I wouldn't say it's unifying. It's definitely very divisive. But, their country, like ours, is kind of in a fighting mood and not in the mood to be offended by this lowbrow mudslinging, rather in the mood to join in it. It feels cathartic, and it feels for many like it's about time. So I can't wait to see what he does. I am sure it's going to be very controversial, but, as Trump once put it, hey, what do you have to lose?
She is the best, isn't she? Megyn Kelly, exclusive to Paul Murray Live each and every week. Happy birthday to my godson, Ollie, turning 10 today. Hopefully you and your brothers had a good day. Always love your mum and dad. And straight after the break, plenty to talk about, including a ghost from Australia's political past turns up in court. Yeah, the search is over, by the way. Liz Storer, in love, Argentinian president. She'll reveal all in a moment or two's time. Craig Thompson, remember when his vote mattered in the federal parliament? Well, today he was back in court pleading guilty to charges. Here's Channel 9.
Former federal MP Craig Thompson has tonight admitted committing fraud, wrongly claiming thousands of dollars in COVID support. The 59-year-old is alleged to have used $25,000 in small business grants to pay for private school fees, a car and credit card debt. Thompson pleaded guilty to 2 charges of dishonestly obtaining financial advantage by deception, while another charge has been withdrawn.
Tom. Remember, of course, when the now Prime Minister, then Deputy Prime Minister, just before the 2013 election, who was it he was having a beer with? Oh, that's right, Craig Thompson. Wonder if they've ever spoken since. Probably not. Wonder if ever he's got a run on Toto One. Now, again, my feeling is that he probably doesn't call it Toto One, but let's call it Toto One because it's really going to annoy him.